can see that," replied Wilbur. He gave a jump in the air, twirled, ran a few steps, stopped, looked all around, sniffed the smells of afternoon, and then set off walking down the orchard. Pausing in the shade of an apple tree, he put his strong snout into the ground and began pushing, digging, and rooting. He felt very happy. He had plowed up quite a piece of ground before anyone noticed him. Mrs. Zuckerman was the first to see him. She saw him from the kitchen window, and she immediately shouted for the men. You guys, I want you to pause here, and I want you to write what you think is going to happen. Do you think they're going to catch him? Do you think he's going to run away? All right, go ahead and pause. Homer! She cried. Pigs out! Lurvy! Pigs out! Homer! Lurvy! Pigs out! He's down there under the apple tree. Now the trouble starts, thought Wilbur. Now I'll catch it. The goose heard the racket, and she too started hollering. Run, 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 downhill! Make for the woods, the woods! She shouted to Wilbur. They'll never, never, never catch you in the woods. The Cocker Spaniel heard the commotion, and he ran out from the barn to join the chase. Mr. Zuckerman heard, and he came out of the machine shed where he was mending a tool. Lurvy, the hired man, heard the noise and came up from the asparagus patch where he was pulling weeds. Everybody walked towards Wilbur, and Wilbur didn't know what to do. The woods seemed a long way off, and anyway, he had never been down there in the woods and wasn't sure he would like it. Get around him, Lurvy, said Mr. Zuckerman, and drive him toward the barn. And take it easy. Don't rush him. I'll go and get a bucket of slops. I wonder what slops is. Maybe we'll find out. The news of Wilbur's escape spread rapidly among the animals on the place. Whenever any creature broke loose on Zuckerman's farm, the event was of great interest to the others. The goose shouted to the nearest cow that Wilbur was free, and soon all the cows knew. Then one of the cows told one of the sheep, and soon all the sheep knew. The lambs learned about it from their mothers. The horses in their stalls in the barn pricked up their ears when they heard the goose hollering, and soon the horses had caught on to what was happening. Wilbur's out, they said. Every animal stirred and lifted its head and became excited to know that one of his friends got free and was no longer pinned or tied fast. Ooh, so this is all the drama around the farm. Wilbur didn't know what to do or which way to run. It seemed as though everybody was after him. If this is what it's like to be free, he thought, I believe I'd rather be pinned up in my own yard. The Cocker Spaniel was sneaking up on him from one side. Lurvy, the hired man, was sneaking up on him from the other side. Mrs. Zuckerman stood ready to head him off if he started for the garden. And now Mr. Zuckerman was coming down toward him carrying a pail. This is really awful, thought Wilbur. Why doesn't Fern come? He began to cry. You guys, I infer that Wilbur is feeling very scared. He's thinking of Fern, and he's wishing that Fern would come and save him. So this lets me know that he's in a position that he's not comfortable in. The goose took command and began to give orders. Don't just stand there, Wilbur. Dodge about, crawled the goose. Skip around, run toward me, slip in and out, in and out, in and out. Make for the woods, twist and turn. The Cocker Spaniel sprang for Wilbur's hind legs. Wilbur jumped and ran. Lurvy reached out and grabbed. Mrs. Zuckerman screamed at Lurvy. The goose cheered for Wilbur. Wilbur dodged between Lurvy's legs. Lurvy missed Wilbur and grabbed the spaniel instead. Nicely done, cried the goose. Try it again. Run downhill, suggested the cows. Run toward me, yelled the gander. Run uphill, cried the sheep. Turn and twist, honked the goose. Jump and dance, said the rooster. Look out for Lurvy, called the cows. Look out for Zuckerman, yelled the gander. Watch out for the dog, cried the sheep. Listen to me, screamed the goose. Poor Wilbur was dazed and frightened by this hullabaloo. He didn't like being the center of all this fuss. He tried to follow the instructions his friends were giving him, but he couldn't run downhill and uphill at the same time. He couldn't turn and twist when he was jumping and dancing, and he was crying so hard he could barely see anything that was happening. After all, Wilbur was a very young pig, not much more than a baby, really. He wished Fern were there to take him in her arms and comfort him. When he looked up and saw Mr. Zuckerman standing quite close to him, holding a pail of warm slops, he felt relieved. He lifted his nose and sniffed. The smell was delicious. Warm milk, potato skins, wheat middlings, Kellogg's Corn Flakes, and a popover left from the Zuckerman's breakfast. Come, pig, said Mr. Zuckerman, tapping the pail. Come, pig. Wilbur took a step towards the pail. No, 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 said the goose. It's the old pail trick, Wilbur. Don't fall for it. Don't fall for it. He's trying to lure you back into captivity. He's appealing to your stomach. So I want you to pause here and stop and jot. What do you predict is going to happen? Is Wilbur going to go towards Mr. Zuckerman and the pail, or is he going to continue to try and escape? Go ahead and pause. Wilbur didn't care. The food smelled appetizing. He took another step toward the pail. Pig, pig, said Mr. Zuckerman in a kind voice and began walking slowly towards the barnyard, looking all about him innocently, as if he didn't know the little white pig was following along behind him. You'll be sorry, 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 called the goose. Wilbur didn't care. He kept walking toward the pail of slops. You'll miss your freedom, honked the goose. An hour of freedom is worth a barrel of slops. Wilbur didn't care. When Mr. Zuckerman reached the pig pen, he climbed over the fence and poured the slops into the trough. Then he pulled the loose board away from the fence so that there was a wide hole for Wilbur to walk through. Reconsider! Reconsider! Cried the goose. Wilbur paid no attention. He stepped through the fence into his yard. He walked to the trough and took a long drink of slops, sucking in the milk hungrily and chewing the popover. It was good to be home again. While Wilbur ate, Lurvy fetched a hammer and some 8 penny nails and nailed the board in place. Then he and Mr. Zuckerman leaned lazily on the fence, and Mr. Zuckerman scratched Wilbur's back with a stick. It doesn't seem like Mr. Zuckerman is very upset with Wilbur, right? He wouldn't be scratching his back if he was upset. He's quite a pig, said Lurvy. Ooh. Yes, he'll make a good pig, said Mr. Zuckerman. Wilbur heard the words of praise. He felt the warm milk inside his stomach. He felt the pleasant rubbing of the stick along his itchy back. He felt peaceful and happy. This had been a tiring afternoon. It was still only about 4 o'clock when Wilbur was ready for bed. I'm really too young to go out into the world alone, he thought as he lay down. Okay, 3rd graders, so now that we are done reading the 3rd chapter of Charlotte's Web, Escape, I want you to go ahead and find a piece of paper in your spiral or just any piece of paper that's around your house that you can write on. And I want you to title it The Retell, Chapter 3, Escape. And I want you to tell me kind of a summary of what we just read. I'm going to share with you guys the summary I wrote, but before you look at the summary I wrote, I want you to write yours first, okay? So go ahead and pause the video and write down your summary of Chapter 3, Escape. So my retell, my summary is this. Fern comes to visit Wilbur at her Uncle Z's, I put Uncle Z for short for Uncle Zuckerman, Uncle Zuckerman's barn when she can. One day, Fern doesn't come and Wilbur is bored and lonely. A goose tells him about a loose board and Wilbur escapes. Mrs. Z sees him and Mr. Z, Mrs. Z, and Lurvy chase him. To solve the problem, Mr. Z gets slop and lures Wilbur back into the barn where he eats, gets sleepy, and goes to bed. So our summaries might not look identical, and that's okay, you guys. The important part, or the important thing, is that you tried and you read with me on the read aloud. Thank you so much for reading with me, and I will see you on the next recording.